To some, home is where you're from. To others, it's where you know you can always go or where you'll always feel welcome. SciShow has found a home here on YouTube, but we're also at home wherever you get your podcasts and on other popular social media platforms. So this SciShow compilation includes videos from across different SciShow channels and platforms that explore some of the different ways that we humans think about home. And there's a lot of variety. Some people even live outside of our home planet. So first up, we're calling on one of our SciShow space hosts, Reed, to explain how hard it's been for us to make a home anywhere else in the universe.
New crews arrive at the International Space Station every couple months, so it seems like we've got the whole living in orbit thing figured out. But America's first space station fell apart when it launched, had a crew rebel, and crash back to Earth before NASA could save it. Its name was Skylab, and space programs worldwide learned a lot about how to keep astronauts happy, healthy, and productive from the 3 crews who lived on board. Humanity's first space station was the Salyut 1, launched by the Soviets in 1971. But the missions had some problems, and the Salyut 1 was deorbited later that year after only 1 crew made it on board. 2 years later, the US got into the game with Skylab, which launched on May 14th, 1973. Skylab was a Saturn IVB rocket booster that was adapted so astronauts could live inside. It was much roomier than anything in space before, giving the astronauts room to shower, sleep, do experiments, and really experience microgravity like no one ever had. Skylab's power came from 2 large solar panel arrays, and shields protected it from solar radiation and micrometeoroids, the bits of dust that become shooting stars in Earth's atmosphere and can turn an unprotected spaceship into Swiss cheese. But the mission got off to a rocky start when it launched. One of the shields fell off, which tore off one of the solar panel arrays and jammed the other one. Skylab made it into orbit, but was uninhabitable without those pieces. It basically had no power, and the sun heated the inside to over 90 degrees Celsius. When the first crew was sent up later that month, NASA had to figure out how the heck to do major repairs on something in orbit. Over the course of several spacewalks, the astronauts fixed the jammed solar panel and deployed a bright orange sunshade to cool down the inside. NASA learned a lot from these first big in-space repairs, which definitely weren't the last of their kind. The ISS, for example, needs regular repairs, and the Hubble Space Telescope had a faulty mirror that needed to be fixed in space before it could take clear photographs. Once they made it livable, Skylab's first crew hopped on board and got down to business. Or really, they got down to science. More than 80 experiments were conducted on Skylab, including biology, physics, and astronomy experiments that were proposed by high school students. But there were also experiments for professional scientists, like the Apollo telescope mount, which first detected things like holes in the solar corona. It was a precursor to the ISS's solar instruments that monitor the sun's brightness and intensity, which can affect climate down here on Earth. Another thing NASA wanted to know was how people's bodies responded to being in space for weeks or months at a time. Salyut 1's crew was in space for 23 days, which was a world record at the time. But each of Skylab's crews blew past that record, with the final crew spending a full 84 days in orbit. With that much time in microgravity, NASA could see evidence of bone density and body mass loss, which happens because astronauts' bodies don't have to fight against gravity and other stresses as much. Nowadays, astronauts do certain regular exercises in space to combat this problem, but space agencies are still researching ways to keep them healthy. Skylab's final crew launched in November 1973, only a few months after the station was put in orbit, and they had a rough relationship with their bosses. They hid being sick in space, which is a no-no when you don't have access to medical help, and they were also exhausted by the long 16-hour workdays, so they couldn't possibly accomplish all the tasks they were commanded to do. Eventually, they rebelled, turning off all communication with NASA for a day just to relax. Of course, NASA wasn't happy about this, and none of those astronauts ever went to space again. But the incident also taught NASA some important lessons. Working in space can be slow, especially for astronauts who haven't been there before, and you can't treat humans like robots, so future crews were given much more balanced schedules. But after that crew returned to Earth in 1974, Skylab stayed empty. NASA had hoped they could send up more astronauts on an early shuttle mission in 1977 or 1978, but the program got delayed. Plus, they ignored researchers' predictions about more solar activity, which expanded Earth's atmosphere enough that it started dragging Skylab down. By the time NASA considered sending a shuttle capital to push Skylab into a higher stable orbit, there just wasn't enough time. So on July 11, 1979, uninhabited for more than 5 years, Skylab re-entered the atmosphere and broke apart over Australia and the Indian Ocean. Skylab set the stage for future space stations like Mir and the ISS, and showed that people really could live in space for a while and do important scientific research, as long as you give them time to rest, of course.
So for us humans, home is usually somewhere on Earth. But that still leaves a lot of options for what your home could look like. You could have a minimalist home, a knick-knack-filled home, or houseplants covering every square inch of the place. And there is some research supporting the idea that houseplants are more than just decor. They might make your home happier. Here's the psychology of how that works from the SciShow Psych channel. Instagram is full of seemingly happy plant owners cultivating succulents and philodendrons. You might have even seen local plant stores advertise their wares as stress-reducing roommates. And the truth is, there is some evidence that houseplants are good for your mental health. It's just not really clear why. We've been studying how houseplants make us feel for decades in a range of different indoor situations. But some of the most robust evidence that houseplants can improve mental health comes from hospitals. For example, a study from 2009 looked at how the presence of plants and flowers affected the recovery of 90 patients in the hospital for hemorrhoidectomies. And that is what it sounds like. It's a time in your life when it's probably not bad to have a plant friend around. They found that patients in rooms with plants did fare better. Their blood pressure was lower, and they reported less pain, anxiety, and fatigue. The patients also said that the plants helped them to relax and feel less anxious and made them feel more positively about the hospital staff caring for them. And the researchers who led this study have found similar results with plants in the rooms of appendectomy and thyroidectomy patients as well. The thing is, these hospital studies don't tell us a whole lot about why this effect occurs, just that it seems to. Researchers have tried to drill deeper into mechanisms by looking at plants in other indoor environments, like offices. And these studies seem to back up the idea that plants can positively affect our moods, but the data start to get a little murkier. One of the big questions is whether plants affect specific cognitive processes, and therefore make us feel better by lifting our mental load, or are just generally de-stressing. Some psychologists think that indoor plants and other living things have a restorative effect based on the idea of attention restoration theory. According to this theory, voluntary attention, the attention needed for things that aren't inherently fascinating but must be focused on nonetheless, is finite. But if you can just stop focusing so hard on things, you can give your mind time to replenish its attention reserves. And plants may help you do that because they are inherently interesting, so you don't have to force yourself to pay attention to them. One research team found that having plants in a room did help the 34 student participants to increase their attention capacity after a proofreading task. But they felt that that might have been because the plants made the room feel more pleasant and reduced the participants' stress levels in general rather than having a real restorative effect. And there are good reasons to suspect that the presence of plants is just kind of relaxing. Like in a 2013 study, 18 tested participants reported being more comfortable in an office environment with plants than a space without them. Even if a relaxing effect is real and directly induced by the plants themselves, it still doesn't tell us what about plants makes us feel less stressed. Researchers in that 2013 study asked the participants to say what they preferred in terms of color, odor, and plant size, and found that the group favored small, green, lightly scented plants. So it may be that those sensory experiences, seeing small bits of green or smelling living things, somehow triggers relaxation. But unfortunately, studies that have tried to tease out whether it's the color, three-dimensional shape, scent, or some other aspect of a plant that really matters haven't shed a ton of light on things. In part, that's because many of the studies use surveys to ask the participants about their emotional and psychological responses to the plants. While these results are relatively consistent across studies, they're subjective measures prone to all kinds of biases. And linking mental states to more objective measures like physiological changes is tricky at best. Many studies look at changes to blood oxygenation in parts of the brain, for example. Participants in these studies wear a special sensor that uses spectroscopy spectroscopy to measure near-infrared light absorption. You see, red blood cells absorb light differently when they're carrying a lot of oxygen. And since oxygenation and blood flow in the brain have been linked to neural activity, this measure might give the researchers a peek at how the brain is responding to different conditions. But studies often get confusing results. Like in a 2016 study, researchers had 24 men in their 20s look at either live plants or an empty flower box for 3 minutes. After that, the scientists detected a decrease in blood oxygenation in the right prefrontal cortex in the plant viewing group. That went hand in hand with reports of feeling more comfortable and relaxed by viewing the plants. So you might think less prefrontal cortex oxygenation equals a more relaxed state of mind. But another study from 2015 found significant increases in blood oxygenation in both the left and the right prefrontal cortex when 18 participants viewed a real plant as opposed to a projected image of it. This lack of consistency shows just how difficult it can be to untangle the correlations between physiological and psychological responses. And some researchers have been critical of the methodology of studies looking at indoor plant effects on mood in general. A 2009 review of 21 studies took issue with a number of methods in the field, including the fact that studies often used small sample sizes. You wouldn't expect the effects of indoor plants to be, huge, and if they have small effects from a statistical perspective, you'd need a large number of participants to pick them up. Similarly, they criticized the variation in how the plants were presented in different studies. The type, size, and placement of plants, as well as the duration of exposure, all differ greatly, and that makes results difficult to compare. But the reviewers did feel that the question of whether or not indoor plants can affect our mental health is worth studying, so they made some recommendations for future experiments. These included implementing more systematic approaches to plant exposure and making sure that studies looking at restorative effects of plants actually had the participants do something taxing enough to require restoration. So even though we've been studying this for decades, we still don't seem to understand why we see positive effects from plants in places like hospitals, or if the results mean houseplants boost your brain power or improve your mental health in general. But look, here's the situation. Those plants on your desk and by your couch are almost definitely not harmful to you, as long as you're not allergic to them or something. So if you feel like your world is better when your desk or living room looks a little bit more like a jungle, you do you. Regardless of what you keep in your home, they all pretty much serve the same purpose, right? Your home is a shelter. But your home might come with more functions in the near future. Here's how close we are to the perfect smart home. There are all kinds of things that connect to the internet these days, from smart refrigerators that tell you when your food is expired to office lights you can turn off with your smartphone. Together, this collection of smart devices is called the Internet of Things, and it's changing how we run our homes, stores, and even restaurants. But someday, it might be able to do a whole lot more. In the futuristic, perfectly automated smart homes you see in comic books and sci-fi, the house basically runs itself. It knows exactly what you need at any time, and there's a virtual assistant that can answer questions and control appliances. We're not quite there yet, but a future with smart buildings that can do all of those things isn't as far off as you might think. There are just a few main types of technology that we need to develop first, and the good news is we're well on our way to figuring them out. For a real smart home, you'd need a system powerful enough to keep all your devices perfectly in sync, communicating with each other and aware of what's happening all around the house. So when your smart alarm clock goes off in the morning, it might turn on the lights in the living room, start a pot of coffee, and turn the TV onto your favorite channel. But the system would also need to be advanced enough to know if your roommate is already up and watching TV, so it wouldn't change the channel. A system like that would need some powerful hardware, and a little speaker on your kitchen counter at the moment isn't gonna cut it, but there's a pretty good workaround. Most smart devices are already connected to a remote, more powerful central computer that takes care of the advanced data processing stuff. So you wouldn't need a supercomputer at home to run all the complicated programs that would keep track of everything and figure out the best way to automate your house. The data would just be sent to that remote computer over the internet, which would process it and then send instructions back to your devices. But even with enough computer power for a connected system, you still need to design software capable of automating an entire house. We have assistants on smartphones, but they're not that great. They're only built to understand certain types of commands, and they still get confused a lot. To make that perfect virtual butler, we'll need advances in two fields of computer science: natural language processing and machine learning. Natural language processing is centered around designing programs that can understand us the way we naturally speak. That means your smart home would have to understand original sentences, their context, words with different meanings, and all of the other things that make up language. But because language is so complicated, we probably won't have computers that can do that perfectly for quite a while. One thing that could help, though, is machine learning, where computers gather data and teach themselves. So instead of programming a billion words and grammar rules into a smart home, the software could just teach itself what to do. Devices all over the world would collect data on the commands people gave them and then adapt their programming and algorithms in response. You probably already have an assistant on your phone that uses a version of this. That's how it learned things like new slang or fashion trends. We just, of course, have not gotten to the point where they can learn to understand us perfectly. And honestly, I don't understand what people are talking about these days sometimes. With more advanced machine learning, your home could figure out how to answer every question you could possibly ask it. Based on the data it collected, it could just learn whether to only suggest dinner recipes after 5 p.m. or only brew decaf coffee after noon. So if you ever wanted a virtual butler waiting on you hand and foot, there's still hope. Finally, and maybe most importantly, your smart home would need to be totally secure. Besides having routers or other devices to protect your Wi-Fi network from snoopers, the devices in your home would need to be able to shut down attacks. Everything connected to the internet would be an access point for the rest of your wireless network. So hackers could use something like, say, a smart fish tank to get to the rest of your accounts and passwords. Which sounds ridiculous, but that's exactly what happened to a casino last summer. A perfect smart home would need to be protected against both current attacks and any vulnerabilities that are discovered after the appliances are built. Not all companies think about that when they're building something small, like a fish tank, so everyone would have to get on board. And your house would still need to protect itself even if the company that made your devices went out of business or stopped updating its software. Like, you shouldn't need to buy a brand new fridge after a year because the startup that built it went under and there's a new virus going around. To get that perfect smart home security, we need to figure out ways to keep updating all of our appliances, no matter how small, and to make sure those updates are sustainable in the long run. Perfect smart buildings will transform our lives someday, from how we live to how we shop to how we do our jobs, but there are a lot of developments in computer science to be made before that can happen. So for now, our technology isn't quite perfect yet, but we're getting there. With all these gadgets in your home, it could be a while until you need to talk to another person. And some people want their home to be a peaceful, secluded oasis. But others want a home to be right in the middle of the hustle and bustle. They want a shoebox in the big city with all the excitement of never knowing who they'll meet on the streets. If you're having trouble pinpointing where your home falls along that spectrum, it may be because cities are hard to define. But we took a stab at it in this episode of the SciShow Tangents podcast. Hello and welcome to SciShow Tangents, is the lightly competitive science knowledge showcase. I'm your host, Hank Green, and joining me this week, as always, is science expert Sari Riley.
Hello.
And our resident everyman, Sam Schultz.
Hello.
Now, as always, we introduce this week's topic with the traditional science poem. This week is going to be from me. A collection of people, just a few, is definitely not anything new. And a few more than that, and then, again, that's a very old trend. Multiply that by a dozen, and see it's starting to look a bit weird to me, and multiply that again by 10,002. That's something that's entirely new. It can be pretty or gritty, but not itty-bitty. You can pack us together, and you get a city that clings to the side of a hill, a city that's home to a lumber mill, a city that needs a giant landfill, a city that's just Jacksonville, a city that millions of people... a city that's millions of people reaching for something they can't describe. For thousands of years we've done this, but still we do not know why. That's my city poem.
It was a beautiful city poem.
The city is probably not a thing that's particularly easy to define, except that it is definitely a large gathering of people who all live in one place.
Yep.
But the lines between it, I often am not sure whether I live in a city, for example.
They're very blurry. Everyone, it seems, takes the I'll know it when I see it definition approach, which, you know, we've done for plenty of episodes here because it's easy. Yeah. You can say, here's the line.
Well, it's almost not hard because everybody agrees that nobody knows what a city is. Because it's not like one more person moved to town, we officially are a city. Though I think in some places it is legally designated. Right. But that's just the law.
That's where it gets complicated, where people have to define a city for quantitative studies. because us scientists, we've got to be like, we've got to set a threshold, even if it's arbitrary. And then a bunch of people set different thresholds for laws and for studies and for, I don't know, mostly laws. And then things get complicated. So, for example, using different countries, everyone has a different minimum population size to define an urban area or a city. So it can be like 200 in Denmark, 2,000 in Argentina, 5,000 in India, 50,000 in Japan, even 100,000 in China, which are still like relatively small.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Missoula is 70,000 and sometimes I straight call it a town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually it seems like from what I found across the internet, and by that I mean a couple papers that I had time to look at, is that statisticians generally have settled around at least 50,000 inhabitants, but then also a certain density of that.
Yeah, you can draw a line that it has 50,000 people in it. In any place with 50,000 people.
But it has to be around 1,500 inhabitants per square kilometer. Just not too densely packed. I don't have a comparison for that, but it seems like the definition of city versus town versus village or whatever is people, the density of the people, and then you can start layering on other sociological and other concepts like building structure, cultural, behavioral approach, like the diversity in languages that you find in an area. Are you going to classify it as a city? But numbers are the easiest one to draw.
But then there's also like the reality that a lot of cities used to be like a bunch of smaller towns and they just got sort of like lumped into one. Yeah. And LA is this way where it's Los Angeles, but then it's like they used to be lots of different pockets that just all got connected together. And now at what point is it not Los Angeles anymore? Like, and there are even places like there's inholdings in LA. Like I don't know which one it is, but there are little places that are like, nope, we're not LA. We're entirely surrounded by LA, but we're not LA.
The Vatican situation.
Yeah, it's a Vatican situation, but it's Burbank.
Yeah.
Instead of the Pope, it's Rhett and Link.
Yeah, so I don't know when that comes. So a lot of languages only have a couple words for cities too. It's like you got the big one and you got the small one. And English has 3, like city, town, village.
I would have guessed we had more.
We have more. I guess if you start subdividing Hamlet.
Yeah. Hamlet.
Okay, borough.
Before we get too deep, it's time for us to move on to the quiz portion of our show. Are you ready to be quizzed?
Yes.
It's going to be a city's truth or fail. Life can be tough in the big city, and it can require lots of changes and adaptations for humans, but also for animals. So scientists have been studying city animals, leading to some very educated hypotheses and conclusions about how our habits and buildings have changed our animal neighbors. The following are 3 possible tales of city-based animal evolution, but only one of them is rooted in actual scientific fact. You're going to have to tell me which one. Story number 1. Summers can make city streets unbearably hot, of course, but alas, animals still find themselves needing to hit that pavement. So in San Juan, the Puerto Rican crested anole has been adapting its lizard body to deal with that heat by growing an additional layer of skin on its feet that shields it from all that heat on the pavements.
Hot foot.
But that might not be the true fact. It might be story number 2. One of the first things about going to a new city is that you got to find some new places to eat. But all that food can be overwhelming to both our choices and our bellies. To make good use of discarded takeout food throughout New York City, white-footed mice have upgraded their metabolism with genetic changes that make them better able to digest fatty foods. But that also might be a lie, and it might be this one. Story number 3. In a city full of crowds and noise, it can be hard to stand out, but everybody's still looking for love, which means that everybody's also looking for clever strategies to get a date, even if they are birds. In the city of Leiden, great tits make their songs stick out to potential mates by developing new melodies that are actually copied from popular hits that can be heard on radios throughout the city. So, is it story number 1, lizards developing pavement protective paws? Story number 2, pizza mice? Or story number 3, great tits cover human songs to stand out in the crowd?
For the first one, lizards developing little hot feet.
Hot feet.
That makes sense, I think.
It does make sense.
Yeah, it does get hot.
You can't have shoes. They can't buy lizard shoes in this economy. No way.
No.
But you can
They couldn't
walk around
possibly.
and just get thicker skin.
I can't think of any compelling reason that wouldn't be it.
Well, there are two other options it could be.
Oh, okay.
So that's the main one.
What about pizza mice, Sam? I feel like you would
So
have
what are they
good
doing?
thoughts.
Their genome is changed to allow them to better digest fatty foods. So like mice might traditionally eat grain, but now they eat a lot of cheese and etc. Just like fettuccine Alfredo, bacon,
little prosciutto.
All those big city foods.
They're hanging out at the Olive Garden.
Well, my first thought was that white-footed mice aren't real. Are they?
No, they're real.
Oh, okay. Well, that blows that out of the water.
Great tits are also real.
Yes.
I know that one.
And anole lizards are also real. Anole lizards? I don't know how to say it.
I like a knoll better, so I'd like to motion it be a knoll.
Oh, Jay says anole.
Anole.
A
Oh.
knoll.
That sounds like a pasta, though. The pizza mice are eating the anole.
The anole Alfredo.
Yeah.
That was my Italian accent.
Yeah, I think shockingly mine was a little better than yours.
It was
So would
the
you-
anole Alfredo.
Okay, well, then the third one, the tits. Singing the pop songs. I would say, I don't think they're known to be one of the birds that talk of Sam's mythical dreams. I don't know if they have enough mimicry, and I guess with enough urban exposure.
The question is, do y'all know enough about great tits to know whether they're good at mimicry?
I don't even know what they look like, and I'm too afraid to Google it.
No, they're just like a little normal little bird. They look kind of
They look like normal little birds.
like if you
I'll give it a
pictured
try.
a quintessential bird in a picture book, they look like that, I think.
Yeah, they look a lot like that.
That's a great tit.
Yeah, no, and I Googled
Okay.
great tit just now, and it is all birds.
Those little
All the
guys
way
ain't
down.
mimicking anything. They're just going do 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 do. Their heads are too small to keep all that stuff in their brain to mimic it.
I'm going to go with pizza mice because I think I like the little Ratatouille. It's Ratatouille in real life. He eats the pizza.
Yes.
While you were talking, I came around on the pizza mouse thing. I think that is the one it is. Because you said the thing about they were eating grain, now they're eating cheese. I feel like that makes sense to me. And they probably can change really quickly their genomes, right? Isn't that something mice can do?
I mean, I think it's something that happens to it's evolution, through
Yeah, it
natural
happens
selection,
to-
and it is a
But
thing
they
that
probably
happens
do
to
it
all species.
like that. They're like, I need to eat this cheese right away.
There does seem to be some indication that certain animals can evolve faster than others, which is very interesting and something that maybe should also go on my SciShow list.
If cheese is on the line, you're evolving to eat it.
Well, also just
Things.
fast generations. They make a lot of babies really
true.
fast.
Yeah,
so
that's
one of the
natural
ways,
selection
for sure.
can just.
So I will
Yeah.
second.
But lizards also make a lot of babies.
It's true.
And
Nobody's buying your lizard story, Hank. Come on, we're going with Pizza Rat.
Well, researchers have found that the Puerto Rican crested anole has been adapting its feet to city life by making them better able to climb buildings.
So not.
You're right.
Okay.
That's the pizza rat. It turns out that buildings are smoother than the stuff that those anoles would or anoles would normally climb
True.
in nature. And so they have adapted their feet to be better able at climbing smooth buildings. But
Cool.
pizza rat or pizza mouse is true. A paper published in 2017 compared white-footed mice living in parks inside New York City to white-footed mice living in parks outside the city, and the research sequenced their genetic material, and they found that in general, the city mice had changes in genes that help digest and metabolize lipids and carbohydrates. The interesting thing here is that scientists working on this paper disagree about what could be driving the changes, at least as of 2017 when the paper was published. One of them thought the changes might be due to the types of plants and insects available in the city versus not city parks, whereas the other went with the cheeseburger hypothesis, where the idea is that the mice are adapting to fatty foods that are in the trash, which honestly, that makes a lot more
That
sense
adds
to me.
up, yeah.
But figuring
gotta-
out the actual reason is going to require a little more study.
You got a bug in front of you and a chicken strip or whatever.
Oh, I mean, God, there's so much food inside of just a
ravioli.
quarter of a hamburger.
Yeah.
But the great tits, this is actually really interesting too. They were not mimicking songs, but they did adjust their songs in different parts of the city based on the way that noise travels. So there's places where there are a lot of ambient noise, which is lower frequency. And in those places, the tits sang higher frequency songs to be heard over that noise than in places where there wasn't as much of that rumbly bumbly noise.
They were doing some sound engineering, just like our friend Tuna.
Make my frequencies pop, Tuna.
Yeah, you great tit.
Oh boy.
Our homes exist in many diverse kinds of communities. They're also often home to residents of diverse ages and stages of life. If your home happens to include any younger science enthusiasts, they might enjoy our SciShow Kids video about how animals manage to find their way home. We're so happy that you have found your way home to SciShow today. Thanks for watching any and all of our channels.